Welcome to the end of another unit at LTC 8865. In this video, I'm going to be just giving a few final thoughts on our last unit on standards-based grading, and then I'll give a quick preview of this new unit, which is looking at assessing conceptual understanding and mathematical practices. So going back to standards-based grading, there was overall a lot of excitement about standards-based grading, and we heard from several of you who are already trying standards-based grading, either in your building or in one of your classes. So that was nice to have you interacting with the other classmates and answering some questions and sharing some experiences. There are people in the class who are still proponents of traditional grading, which is totally fine. And it was good to see that even if you're in favor of traditional grading, you saw that some of the features of standards-based grading or some of the advantages of it could be folded into traditional grading. So by thinking about standards-based grading, you could almost use that to try to make your traditional grading better, such as using traditional grading to still try to improve communication with students or parents about the standards that are being learned, and also maybe trying to decrease the emphasis on points and increase the emphasis on learning. For those of you who are thinking about switching to standards-based grading, we reiterate one of the points that came up in the discussion board, which is that it might not be easy at first. There might be a bit of some growing pains or a rough transition because students and parents are ingrained in the points-based extra credit system. So we hope that those of you who are trying out standards-based grading or who will try it out recognize that it might be a little bit tough at first, but if you can get through that transition period, there is some green grass on the other side, and we hope that those of you trying it out will stay in touch with each other as you shift your grading practices. With regard to traditional grading, Monique made a good point that there's something like 13 grade categories, because you have these different letters and then you have a plus and minus on each of them, and that 13 categories may be a few too many to be very meaningful, and I kind of agree with that point. And I would add that a fixation on percent scores is even less meaningful than 13 different letter grade categories. So like, can you really say with confidence that a student who received an 89.5% is meaningfully better and more deserving than a student who received an 88%? To me, it seems like you can't really draw such a important, meaningful distinction between percents like that. And yet, by giving percents, it invites students and parents to think of themselves in that way as like, oh, 89.5 must be different than 88 and 89.5 is better. And so you lay yourself out according to these percents that might not be very meaningful, especially when you think about the grades that make up the percent might not be very reliably graded. For example, if you graded something, you might not grade it exactly the same way on a different day of the week or with a different student. So in some ways, traditional grading draws too much attention to what are kind of arbitrary distinctions. And standards-based grading is different because it provides a smaller number of more meaningful grade categories. And instead of fixating on 89.5% versus 88%, you have everyone's attention going toward the standards that are mastered versus other standards that aren't mastered. So don't worry about 89.5 to 88, worry about multiplying these decimals, or worry about solving this kind of algebraic equation or simplifying this kind of expression. And there also is a meaningful difference in standards-based grading between the components of the grade. So there is a meaningful difference between a student who has mastered all of the standards versus another student who is still weak on a couple of the standards. And finally, I just wanted to make the point that the issue with traditional grading isn't just about the students and parents tending to fixate on points rather than on the learning. It's also about us as teachers. In traditional grading, we can get sucked in to a place where we're grading the students' work step by step and just checking for mistakes. And if they avoid mistakes, then they get a perfect score. And we're looking at those details and checking for mistakes instead of assessing understanding. And often we teachers will design scoring guides based around the step-by-step process that we expect them to follow, which then leads to us maybe teaching that direct way that we want them to solve the problems. And then before you know it, you can have a pretty procedural, closed-off type of math class. Or at the very least, you have students who, when they're taking a quiz, they're basically just trying to write down what they think the teacher wants, rather than students using a quiz as a chance to show what they've learned or to show what they understand. So a points-based grading system involves all of us, just like a standards-based grading system will involve all of us as well, teachers, students, and parents. All right, so now I want to shift to a bit of a preview for the new unit, which is on assessing concepts and mathematical practices beyond just assessing content. So the idea behind this unit is that it's pretty easy to assess mathematical facts that are memorized or that students can recall on a test or assignment. And it's pretty easy to assess procedural success. You can just see what procedure they followed, see if they did it right. What's more challenging, but very important, is to assess their conceptual understanding, so their understanding of connections between ideas, if they have flexible understandings of ideas from multiple perspectives, different representations, and also assessing mathematical practices, so the ways that students are actually thinking and engaging with mathematical ideas, not just the facts that they have memorized. So I want to quickly just mention the 8 mathematical practices that we'll be focusing on, which are from the Common Core standards. So you're probably familiar with these, but just really quickly, the first mathematical practice is about problem solving, making sense of problems, and then persevering and trying to find the solution to problems. The second one is about abstract and quantitative reasoning. So this is the idea of sort of interpreting mathematics in situations, recognizing the units that are on our mathematical quantities, and taking mathematical ideas, putting them back into the context and making sure that they make sense. Third practice is argumentation and critiquing reasoning. So this is the idea about being able to make arguments, provide justifications to support mathematical claims, and if you see somebody else providing mathematical justifications, that you can critique those, point out holes in the reasoning, point out additional cases that need to be considered, and all those things. The fourth practice is mathematical modeling. So this refers to taking a big problem that's outside of mathematics and then moving it into mathematics, creating some sort of mathematical model like an equation, a formula, a graph, tables, some sort of mathematical structures that then help you solve the problem and then go back outside of math and interpret what you've done, make sure that it works. So this is kind of this process of mathematizing an engineering problem or a real life problem, mathematize it, do some math, and then bring it back out into the world and see if you've made any sense of it. Next is tool use, being strategic in using tools to help your thinking. This is kind of, a lot of them are digital tools, but it also could be things like drawing and physical tools, and just being strategic about how I'm going to bring those in and use them to support my mathematical thinking. The sixth one we have is attending to precision. So this is precision of calculation, but also precision of communication. So being very careful about what we're saying what we mean, and then being very careful about how we write the mathematics so that we are very precise in doing what we mean to be doing. The seventh practice is looking for and using mathematical structure. So this is breaking down mathematical objects into its parts, and then reassembling it, maybe in the same way, maybe in a new way. So like geometrically breaking up polygons into triangles. In algebra, taking an expression and actually breaking it down into realizing like, oh, I see a part here, it's a product overall. So really seeing the structure and using that to your benefit when you're doing mathematics. And then the last one is looking for and expressing regularity and repeated reasoning. So if you're doing something mathematically multiple times, you're not just doing it over and over again like a machine, you're actually doing it multiple times and looking for patterns, or looking for shortcuts, or looking for some sort of commonality that you can then express and realize, wow, every time I'm doing this, I'm sort of doing the same process. Can we make that into a formula? Or every time I'm doing this, I'm noticing the same pattern in my reasoning. Oh, could we actually sort of give a name to that pattern of reasoning? So really just being mindful of repetition and not having it be mindless repetition, but actually really thinking about patterns in the repetition. So what we're going to do in the unit here is we're going to look at assessing concepts and assessing those mathematical practices. And throughout the unit, we are going to be looking at assessment at the item level. So not assignments, not tests, not a course overall, but really we're going to be digging into specific items. How do items reveal students' conceptual understanding, or how do they reveal the students' capabilities with respect to the mathematical practices? And so throughout the whole unit, you're going to look at different items. You're going to bring up some of your own items and stuff. And we want people to kind of get creative and maybe look at some items that you haven't seen before, and then share some of the ways that you've maybe come up with items that are creative that can help all of us get more insight into our students. The unit structure overall is pretty standard. We have readings, discussions, an assignment, and a personal reflection. There are 3 readings instead of 2, but one of the readings is pretty short and it's from Common Core, so you might be familiar with it already. So there are those 3 readings. Then there are 2 discussions. One discussion is for everybody, and then we're going to split off into 2 groups. So your second discussion will actually be maybe with a subset of the class. And then there's an assignment, pretty standard assignment. The description's already up there, ready for you. That'll be due at the end of the unit in 2 weeks. And then a personal reflection that also you probably do kind of last thing in the unit, turn in within 2 weeks. So that's basically the overview of this new unit. I'm really looking forward to it. The mathematical practices are one of the things that I'm most interested in as a math educator, so I really want to see your thoughts on it. And it's always fun to dig into items and look at some of the mathematics that comes out. So looking forward to this unit, and I will see you online.